For most of human history, the greatest threat to survival was not war. It was not swords, cannons, or invading armies. The real enemy was something far more terrifying, something people could not see, could not understand, and could not stop. Disease. It moved silently through cities. It passed from one body to another without warning, spared no one peasants, kings, soldiers, or priests. And once it appeared, it rarely came alone. Fear followed, panic followed, death followed. This is the story of how humanity, desperate and afraid, tried to protect itself not with weapons, but with knowledge, improvisation, and a small physical barrier that would quietly change history. Before modern medicine, people had no concept of bacteria or viruses. There were no microscopes, no antibiotics, no scientific explanations. When illness struck, it felt random, cruel, almost supernatural. A healthy person could fall ill within days. Strange sores would appear, fever would burn through the body, pain would spread, and then silence. Families watched helplessly as loved ones faded away. Doctors, if they could even be called, that were powerless. In this world, every unexplained illness carried a terrifying question. How did this happen? How do we stop it from happening again? Long before people understood how disease spread, they understood one thing very clearly. Some forms of contact brought danger. Ancient civilizations noticed patterns. They didn't know why, but they knew when. In ancient Egypt, medical texts describe protective coverings made from finely woven linen. These were not luxury items or survival tools. Among the elite, these coverings were sometimes dyed or treated, possibly for ritual reasons, possibly for protection. No one knew for certain, but people were trying. In ancient China, records suggest the use of oil-treated paper and silk barriers. In Japan, thin leather coverings, known centuries later as koagata, were crafted with care and reused, sometimes handed down. These objects were not discussed openly. They were hidden, whispered about, and used discreetly. But they existed because fear existed. The Roman Empire was vast. Its roads connected continents. Its armies moved constantly. And with movement came disease. Roman physicians observed that soldiers frequently fell ill after long campaigns. In crowded camps, illness spread quickly. Some historical sources suggest the use of animal membranes, particularly from sheep and goats, as protective barriers. These were crude, uncomfortable, and far from perfect. But again, people were trying. Protection was no longer just personal, it was strategic. A sick soldier was useless. An outbreak could weaken an entire legion. Survival demanded solutions, even imperfect ones. If ancient times were dangerous, the Middle Ages were catastrophic. Europe was gripped by waves of disease that no one could control. The Black Death alone wiped out entire towns. Other illnesses followed, relentless, recurring, and brutal. One disease in particular terrified society. It appeared suddenly, it spread rapidly, and it left visible marks on the body. People didn't know its origin, they only knew its consequences. Medical authorities panicked, religious leaders blamed sin, governments tried and failed to contain it. I think the climate of fear protection became desperate. He proposed the use of a linen sheath, soaked in a chemical solution, designed to act as a protective barrier against disease. This was revolutionary. For the first time, a protective object was described scientifically not as superstition, but as prevention. Flopio did not frame his idea around pleasure or morality. He framed it around survival, and remarkably, he claimed success. This marked a turning point. Protection was no longer improvised, it was intentional. Despite its potential, this object remained controversial. It was rarely spoken about openly. Its use was private, often secret. In many societies, even discussing disease carried shame. Protection implied risk, and risk implied guilt. Yet, behind closed doors, demand grew. Among the wealthy, specially crafted versions appeared. Some were decorated, some were perfumed. Not for luxury, but to mask fear. As European powers expanded across the globe, they carried more than flags and weapons. They carried disease. Explorers, sailors, and traders unknowingly became carriers. Illness crossed oceans faster than ever before. In port cities, outbreaks were common. Governments struggled to respond. Once again, protective barriers gained importance. They were no longer regional tools, they became global necessities. The 19th century marked a dramatic shift. Science advanced, materials improved, manufacturing scaled. The discovery of vulcanized rubber transformed protective objects entirely. For the first time, they could be mass-produced, more durable, more reliable. This object moved from handcrafted secrecy into industrial reality, became more accessible, but still controversial. During times of war, disease has always killed more soldiers than weapons. Military leaders understood this painfully well. During the First World War, armies began issuing protective barriers as part of standard equipment, not as moral tools, not as lifestyle choices, but as medical necessity. A healthy soldier meant strength. A sick soldier meant vulnerability. Once again, survival drove innovation. As the 20th century progressed, medical understanding improved. Diseases were named. Transmission was studied. Prevention became scientific. This small object found its place not in headlines, but in hospitals, clinics, and public health strategies. It became one of the most effective barriers humanity ever created. Not dramatic, not heroic, but quietly powerful. It does not roar like a weapon. It does not shine like a crown. Yet throughout history, this simple barrier has saved countless lives. It stood between fear and safety, between ignorance and knowledge, between life and death. And while it may seem ordinary today, its story is anything but. This is not the history of desire, it is the history of survival. History often celebrates kings, generals, and empires, but real survival is often shaped by small, unnoticed objects. Objects born from fear, refined by science, and carried forward by necessity. This is one of them. A quiet guardian against invisible enemies. A reminder that sometimes the smallest inventions leave the deepest mark on human history.